Hello, everyone, and welcome to my, I believe it said Noodle Rocket in the description, interactive presentation. So for this week, what you're going to need is a jar. Particularly, it recommends that you have a mason jar for this experiment. That way you can seal and compact the lid on top of the jar in this experiment, but I don't have anything like that around here, so I'm just going to be using a screw-on lid, and I'm just going to be holding it down flat like that. Well, when this experiment is going on, because I don't have a mason jar around here, this is the best I could do. You're going to need a noodle, or several noodles, if possible, in case something goes wrong in the experiment and you want to try again, but if something does go wrong, I'll let you know what happens. And for the lid of the jar, I forgot to mention, you're going to need to drill a hole in about the size of the noodle that you're going to use. Mine's like this. It's recommended that you have like a cylinder cone like noodle that doesn't have an edge like mine does. But this is the closest I got to having a very straight and narrow noodle. It just has the edges right there that are kind of curved. So you usually don't want that, but again, I'm working with what I got here. Next, you need hydrogen peroxide. I have a 3%. I believe this will work fine. You're going to need a lighter. And you're going to need 1 teaspoon of yeast that I have right here. And did I miss anything? Nope, that's about it. So let's get started. So first thing you're going to do, let me just adjust the camera so you can see what I'm doing here. The other way. Jar. You're going to fill the jar about a quarter full of the hydrogen peroxide. So about that much for me. Again, I recommend you have a mason jar for this, but I do not have it. And for this next step, this is where you're going to mix the yeast in. If you had a mason jar, you're going to try to seal it as much as possible. You would tap down around the edges and try to seal it as much as possible so that way no air is escaping. In my case, that's not going to be the case. I'm just going to have to screw this on slightly and then just hold it down. But then, as you should see, once I add the yeast right here, nothing is going to immediately happen, but if I add that on in there, and now I just hold it down. Next, you're going to want to shake up the hydroperoxide and the yeast a little bit, and you can see that there's a bit of a bubbly reaction. Oop, and it's actually coming out the top of my noodle right here. I will explain what's happening right there in a minute. Honestly, I'm a little bit nervous at this when I light this now, but there's a gas that's escaping, and now this is where you want to ignite your noodle. The noodle has to be dry for this experiment, just an FYI. Did that work? Nope. I can kind of see that as my lighter tries to ignite this noodle, that the hydrogen peroxide that's spilled out of the container is starting to dissipate a little bit. Come on. Okay, so it doesn't seem like mine is working very well. Yeah, it doesn't seem like my noodle is lighting very well. You can see that it's smoking right there, but it's not igniting as it should. Okay, so, well, what happened? Well, what should have happened in this case is if you look at the bubbly reaction that happened inside of the bottle, and it's still happening a little bit right now. Some of it spurted out of my noodle, as you saw right there, but what happened there was that there was a reaction between the yeast and the hydrogen peroxide that ended up separating the oxygen from the hydrogen peroxide. That's what the yeast did. And that's what all those bubbles were. That was the oxygen that was being separated from the hydrogen peroxide. So a little bit of a in terms of electrostaticity, the yeast had a stronger electrostaticity than the hydrogen peroxide did, and that's why it was able to attract the electrons of the oxygen away from the hydrogen, which is a part of the hydrogen peroxide. I believe it's something like H2O2 for hydrogen peroxide. H2O2, my bad. So, yeah, basically the electrons from the oxygen were being attracted away by the yeast, and that's what was creating the bubbler reaction on the inside. And the noodle acted as a means of guiding which way the gases could escape, first of all. But one thing that was supposed to happen with the noodle here was that as I tried to ignite it, it was supposed to stay ignited as the gas was escaping. Maybe the gas escaped extremely quickly in that case. My jar is relatively small, if you cannot tell right here. It's pretty small, and it seems to be dying down with some bubbles still there on the inside, but yeah, the gas was supposed to mix with the flames that you used for your lighter. I used a gun lighter. You can use any kind of lighter for this experiment, but what should have happened was the noodle should have catched fire, and as the oxygen was escaping, it was going to catch flame as it escaped the from the jar in the form of a like a rocket thruster going off. If you can imagine, like those NASA launch sites and what they did with their rockets. When they shot the fuel out into the rockets, it thrust out some force. It was supposed to be the same kind of thing here with the noodle, and as long as the noodle was burning, then the reaction, as long as of course there was gas inside, was it was going to keep bursting out in a jet of flames. At least that was what was supposed to happen. In terms of what could have gone wrong there, that burst that happened at the very beginning of this experiment probably told me that a lot of gas escaped relatively quickly. I drilled a hole at the top of my jar's lid, just enough to fit the noodle in, which is what you should do with this experiment. Just leave just that much. But I guess one thing is that with my jar, because it was a mason jar, and I couldn't have those seals, the same kind of sealage around the sides. That some of the gas might have been escaping out the sides, although not too much, because there was still some reaction that happened inside of the jar, and there's still bubbles and stuff. So that told me that separation and reaction still happened, but and some gas still got trapped inside, but a lot more probably escapes because of the type of jar I used than if I used a mason jar and I did good sealing it around the side as soon as I threw the yeast in. So yeah, that's pretty much what happened. The yeast reacted with the hydrogen peroxide and with the electrostaticity being stronger, with the yeast attracting the electrons from the oxygen, separating it out from the hydrogen, and it ended up with a bubbling reaction. Gas tried to escape because I didn't have sealage. It ended up probably leaking out the side a bit more than what I desired it. It should have only gone out the noodle. And as that oxygen escaped out the noodle, it should have created a jet of flames, but because there's probably multiple areas of which the gas was escaping, I didn't get the same kind of jet of flame effect that you should have. So, yeah, when you're doing this experiment, try to use a jar that has like a mason jar that you can seal, and it'll absolutely only has one way for which the oxygen can escape. But yeah, that's my as at least as the description on Blackboard called it, the noodle rocket experiment for my interactive presentation this week. I hope you all enjoyed and understand the mistakes that I made here, and have a good day.